Hey everyone, it's your boy Vecco hijacking, hosting the Epicurus's hangout here. And this is actually a debate that is going to be between Epicurus and Wolf. Is it pronounced Wolfgang? Wolf King?
Wolfgang.
Okay, Wolfgang. Okay, great, great. And as you can see in the title, actually, I'm not looking at the actual watch link right now, but the name of this debate is belief in the supernatural reasonable? So I assume that the taking the affirmative is Epicurus, who is a Roman Catholic and a good buddy here on YouTube. And we have Wolfgang, who is an atheist, taking the negative position. So real quick, just spell out the rules. It's 15-minute opening statements for each. Then it's 10-minute rebuttals for each, 5-minute cross-examination for each, and then we're ending it with 5-minute closing for each. And then I'm going to sing a song made from Pharrell afterwards. So anyway, nah, just kidding. But anyway, so without further ado, who's going first, actually? Actually, it would be the affirmative, right?
Mhm.
All right.
That would, yep.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
No, it's me. I'm the affirmative.
I can go first. If,
No, well, you would need something to respond to. So.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. This is
All right.
usually like.
Okay, so I'm going to mute my mic, and let me start the clock real quick. And whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, clock is running.
Okay. So I am taking the affirmative that belief in the supernatural is reasonable. Now, of course, first we have to define what supernatural is. And second of all, we also have to describe what fits in there. So when I say supernatural, I mean something different than metaphysical, which is what I'm going to be used to support the existence of this a supernatural entity. The metaphysical is first and foremost that which pertains to what reality is. So the whatness of reality, if you will. Whereas the supernatural refers to that which exists beyond the natural realm, in a realm that cannot be observed in and of itself. Now what would fit in that, and why does metaphysics take us there? Well, of course, the prime mover, that is God. So why does God exist in the supernatural realm and not in this metaphysical realm? The metaphysical tells us that a being such as God exists, but it does not tell us. But because we do not perceive God or know God directly, we have to indirectly come to that existence through His creation, which is nature. But of course, this isn't anywhere in the argument. This is just a description of what I'm defining as supernatural and metaphysical. For the arguments to support this, there are two. One is the argument for motion, to get us to a first mover or a first cause. And the second argument is that first mover is God. Usually people say you kind of leave that out, so I'll not leave that out. So let's go with the first argument. Premise one. Some things move. This is an indisputable fact. Change happens. Premise two, something which moves can only move by the movement of an antecedent mover, something that moves before it. The third premise is nothing moves itself. The third premise is you can't have an infinite chain of movers. You're going to have to come back to one mover, a prime mover. So the prime mover has to exist in order for any movement to happen. And that's the first argument to support the existence of a first mover. Now, the second argument is going to come a bit later. Now, an important thing to note is what I mean by movement. I don't mean something in the terms of Newtonian laws of motion. That's a different notion. Motion in the Aristotelian sense, from which I'm saying derives from, comes from the notion of act and potency. Now, what are these? Let's take a look at Edward Feser's Scholastic Metaphysics. The theory has its origins in Aristotle's account of the Electics on one hand and Heraclitus on the other. where they went wrong in their respective positions vis-a-vis change versus permanence, an account which has extended by scholastic writers to a critique of the Eleatic and the Heraclitean positions vis-a-vis multiplicity versus unity. Parmenides and Zeno denied the reality of change. Parmenides' position is essentially that, one, change requires being to arise out of non-being or nothingness. But from non-being or nothingness, nothing can arise. So, change is impossible. Zeno aimed to reduce the notion of local motion to absurdity by paradox, some of which presuppose traversing a finite distance would require traversing an infinite number of shorter distances. For example, in the dichotomy paradox, Zeno suggests that a runner can get from point A to B only if he first reaches midpoint between A and B, but he can only reach that midpoint if he reaches the midpoint between A and the midpoint between the midpoint of B, and so on. So there's always a point in the middle that the runner is going to have to traverse. Hence, there can never be something that reaches from A to B, and indeed never move beyond A. A natural first response to such an argument would be to apply the method of respiration and argue that those who deny the reality of change are led to a self-performative contradiction. The eclectic philosopher who has his lips or his pen, the eclectic philosopher who moves his lips or pen in order to put his argument forward, if he bites the bullet and denies that he even has lips and pens are really moving, or that they need to change the minds of the listener or the reader, he still has to go through the steps of his reasoning in his mind that involve change. The reality of change is not self-evident insofar as it is not necessary to that any change ever actually occurs, but is still evident insofar as we have come to acknowledge it in order to argue for anything at all. This tells us that at most something has gone wrong in his argument, not what has gone wrong in his argument. The problem with Parmenides' reasoning in Aristotle's view is neither in the inference from 1, 2, and 3, nor with premise 2, for which Aristotle agrees. Premise 2 is, from being cannot arise non-being. So we can't get something from nothing. So Aristotle agrees there. It is rather with the first premise, the thesis that change would involve being arising from non-being. For there is, according to Aristotle, an alternative analysis of change, to which it involves non-being arising from non-being, but rather one kind of being arising from another kind. So we have, just to lay it out here, what we have is one being, such as ourselves, arising from another being. Maybe the sperm and egg in our parents' reproductive systems. That's not something coming from nothing, that's just one being coming from another being. The way it for instance, he also gives one here of a rubber ball. It might be actually be spherical, solid, smooth to touch, red in color, and sitting motionless in a drawer, but in potency or potentially it is flat and squishy if melted, rough and tough if worn out through use, light and pink if left in the sun too long, and rolling across the ground if dropped. These potentialities or potencies are real features of the ball itself, even if they are not actualities. The ball's potential flatness, squishiness, roughness are not nothing, even if they do not have the kind of being that the ball's roundness, solidity, smoothness, etc. currently have. That is why the ball can become flat or squishy. It cannot become sentient. Zeno overlooks this distinction between being in act and being in potency. The infinite number of smaller distances in the intervals between 2 points A and B are indeed there, but only potential rather than actual. So while there is an infinite distance that's potentially there, it's not actually there. For any potential distance, it has to be brought out by something. But so for any actual infinity, it has to be brought about by anything, something already existing. However, the runner is just traversing a potential infinite, which is not impossible. The runner can extend beyond a potential infinite because the extension of his legs is of a greater potential infinite. So the runner is bringing about something from his own being as well. Heraclitus' view was just to deny that there is any permanence, that there was nothing because everything is really changing. That one makes no sense on the face of it. So act and potency exist. And of course, to rephrase, motion does not mean going from location to location. Motion just means any kind of change at all. So let's look at my kind of glove here. there is actual change between one side and another side. That's not changing through time, that's just change in and of itself, in the glove itself. So we have movements that completely go on. Now, what brings about these movements? One could say, well, another mover. And you could go on ad infinitum. But you run into a problem there. We're trying to refute the notion that, we're trying to refute one notion, that an actual infinite exists. We've already established one does not. But there's another way. If we go on the note, if we go to a first mover, it is pure act. There is no potency within it. There is no potential for it to become something else. Therefore, we have a first mover, something that cannot potentially be this or that. So when we describe the first mover, we're going to have to use a lot of ims and ahs and ins. It's immaterial, for example. Because if something was matter, there would be an exchange in its extent, in its motion. So it has to be simple, of one part. No extension at all. It's immaterial. The second thing it has to be is atemporal. There cannot be any time within God, or the first mover. I'll establish it's God later. Because if there was a first mover, because if there was any moment in time, there would be a change from time t1 to time t2. But before we could get from time t1 to time t2, there would be a time t.5. And to get there, we'd have to get to time t.25. So on, and that, again, just would not work. So let's keep, that's another thing. So immaterial, atemporal, what else? God would also have to be, immutable. Immutable means, of course, changeless, but that's what comes with the definition. So where does that leave us? We have a first mover who is not three things. But since we've established the first mover, how is this exactly God? I mean, God is supposed to be kind of a mind. Don't minds have to change? Don't they have to feel emotion? Well, the interesting thing is, not necessarily, on this viewpoint at least. So how is God so how can a mind be changeless? Especially if it's atemporal. St. Augustine has the answer to this one. Imagine a mental state that doesn't look to something in the future or in the past, but is forever present in one moment, changeless. It knows and understands everything perfectly in that one changeless state. If it exists in such a way, then of course knowledge has to exist in it, because if it's a state of where knowledge could exist, it could gain or lose a bit of knowledge, which of course would strike counter to impermanence. There is nothing that it shouldn't even be able to learn in potency if it's pure act as well. But why does knowledge even have to exist in such a being at all? No, also, why does goodness have to exist in such a being at all, or power, for that matter? Well, comes to a principle in scholastic metaphysics, and that's called the position of proportionate causality. So God being the first mover, the unmoved mover, as it were, he acts as a cause. What kind of cause? Not an efficient cause. An efficient cause has to move upon something immaterial. He's a final cause. A final cause is that for which something else exists, or that for which gives a reason for existing. God does that, of course, without moving or needing to succumb to motion. So he could be an unmoved mover. When it comes to this is, of course, is really the universe as a cause. But in order to be a cause, proportionate causality would dictate something. It would dictate that whatever exists in the effect has to exist greater in the cause. So what exists greater in the cause? Knowledge would have to exist in God himself, because knowledge is not something that, like matter. Matter is something that regards to potency. In print, that there could be more matter or less matter. It also has to traverse something. In principle, matter signifies potentiality. Knowledge does not, as I earlier stated with St. Augustine's illustration. Rather, not matter, but rather knowledge in it signifies a form of impermanence. And because a certain subset of knowledge exists within the world itself or within the universe, it has to exist in the mind of God, in the being of the first mover. So it has all knowledge. Goodness is another thing, in fact. There exists in the world goodness. A lack of goodness is a prevasion, of course. If something lacks anything, then it is by definition falls into the camp of being evil or coming short of a good. God does not lack any of that. When it comes to so because he has no prevasion or potentiality, he's all good as well. Lastly, just to get to power, weakness signifies an ability to be overcome or changed by something or reliance upon something. But that signifies, again, potentiality. God does not have any potentiality within him. Thus, of course, we would have to conclude that power, because he can't be changed, he has to be all-powerful or has full power over everything. Nothing can overcome him. And that is why we call the first mover God. And with that, I conclude.
Okay, great. Excellent. Met the time. All right, so let me just start the clock real quick. Let me actually blow this up. So, can you guys actually see the clock fine on your screen?
Let's see, Wolf.
Okay, I'm gonna zoom in on my window. So, okay, should be able to see it better now. Okay, there you go. Actually, you know what? Let me do this. Should be able to watch it full screen. Oh, let me zoom back a little bit. Sorry, folks. Just trying to. All right, here we go. There we go. Excellent. All right. Okay, so now, Wolf, the moment you're ready, you're going to do your 15-minute opening, and just let me know, and I'll start the button.
All right, let's just see. Do I have everything here? Yep. Okay, I'm ready to begin.
Okay, and go.
All right, I'm Wolfgang, and I'm going to be arguing for the philosophical naturalist side. Now, I'm going to be talking about why I think naturalism is true and why I don't think supernaturalism is true, just looking at the objective facts. Now, before I get into that, let me just talk about philosophical naturalism. That is the belief that observable reality is all there is. Before I get into that, let me just talk about what I mean by truth. Truth is to the degree to which a statement corresponds with reality, and reality is limited to what we can perceive merely through the senses or ascertain directly through reason. Now, it's because of these acknowledgments I think that the scientific method is the most reliable means to understand how the world works, because in order for something to be true, it must be consistent, following the physical laws. It must be coherent, meaning we could learn and make useful theories about what we're observing. And we also must be able to predict, meaning we can gain new information and refine our theories if need be. Now, these three assumptions are known as methodological naturalism, which is the assumption that since we can't detect or contact the supernatural, we limit the scientific investigation to what we do in the natural world. Now, the prime reason I basically subscribe to this position is due to the practical benefits that it yields, and the evidence I cite for that is the history and achievement of scientific progress. Everything that we have an explanation for, the biological organization of life and diversity of species by evolution, how germs and microorganisms proliferate, via bad hygiene and the like, how stars align and stay on course, quantum computers, sending a man to the moon and probes into space, exploring the cosmos. For all of this, the answer has been that of a naturalistic explanation, understood through physical evidence and reason and logic. Now, that's not to say that, with all this knowledge that, we could say there is no supernatural, but as Richard Carrier explains, quote, "No other worldview is directly and substantially supported by any scientific evidence, whereas all scientific evidence so far does support metaphysical naturalism, often directly, sometimes substantially. Though naturalism hasn't yet been proved, it is the best bet going. So with this, I have to say that naturalism indeed has the default position. Now, the second argument that I'm going to bring up in this is the argument from physical mind, which follows. Since all known mental activity requires a physical basis, i.e. the electrical impulses in our brains, there are likely no disembodied minds. But God is conceived of as a disembodied mind. Therefore, it would be inconsistent with our sensory experience to say that such a thing exists as a non-physical mind. It would almost violate the law of non-contradiction to even say so. So I wouldn't say that it actually exists. And the fact that minds are physically dependent upon the brain, the concept of a non-physical mind is just inconsistent. I mean, even if you grant the supernaturalist theist the possibility of possibly never figuring this out, how would you distinguish it from non-existence? Now, the third argument I want to bring up is the problem of evil. If an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God exists, then no evil should exist that isn't caused by human free will. However, you see evils such as hurricanes, earthquakes, starvation, which occur, that isn't caused by human free will. Either this God is missing in action, just non-existing, or he doesn't care enough about his creation to actually use his omnipotent powers to help these people. However, you could say you could possibly never know about this, but these two seem to be the only viable options you have in terms of this thought. And finally, I just want to go over the issues of the prime mover argument, which seem reminiscent to the classic cosmological argument, Kalam cosmological argument, in that things are affected by cause and effect, and because of this, the universe exists as that effect. Therefore, it must have a cause. Now, for the person that says the cause is God, they would have to substantiate exactly how would they actually know that this entity is in fact the God and the God of their religion. But before that, even if you do grant them the possibility that it would logically follow that it would be created by God, the logic of it would have to still follow. Where in fact does this deity come from? Where's its origins? Now, you could say that it was always there, fine, but you'd have to be intellectually honest and ask and honestly ponder these things. Otherwise, you could just say that the universe was always there and be done with it, because honestly, to invoke it even further would violate Occam's razor. Also, the concept of something coming from nothing, it's not the view of any scientist or secular philosopher to say that it's a matter of something coming from nothing, rather patterns of emergence. And what I mean by emergence is self-organization via time and variation through basic regularities. And we sort of see this throughout all the universe, such as the biological organization of life, as I brought up, and I actually just go into detail, in which you have atoms which follow laws of chemistry, which, given time and variation, will produce cells. Cells produce organs. Organs arise as organisms, and their growth and complexity is a matter of evolutionary biological processes that form into the biosphere that we're actually doing now. You also have cities. You have swarms and flocks that form patterns that aren't directed by a leader but arise from simple rules. You have uncultivated ecosystems, even the universe itself, which is the totality of existence and has all these orderly things, and these things aren't produced by mind. They're produced by basic regularities that we understand very imperfectly through science. So with that, I feel that the supernatural hasn't at all been substantiated yet. I'm glad we could actually talk about it and discuss whether or not it's it's actually true. But as I said, I feel like naturalism indeed has the default position, and I would love to hear Epi's rebuttals against the issues I just made. And with that, I sacrifice my last few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so all right, so you looks like you had a little over several minutes available. Did you want to use that for something else, like in your rebuttal, or?
I guess we can use that in my rebuttal. I guess.
Wait, no. Sorry to interrupt, but I don't think it would be fair just to move minutes from one period to another.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
All right.
Although if we do have headway, Beckel, if you want to just keep tally of it, we could just have a post-hangout discussion. Not a post-hangout discussion, but a post-debate discussion online. I wouldn't mind.
I got you. Okay, so
yeah, that sounds cool.
All right, so Wolf, you're just going to forfeit the other few minutes, the other 6 minutes that you have, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, no sweat. All right, so that was Wolfgang, and now we're going to go to the 10-minute rebuttals. And let me just clear my clock. And all right, Epi, whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
I'm ready.
Starting now.
All right, cool. When it comes to the notion that naturalism has the default position, I would have to differ immensely. First of all, naturalism can't handle certain skeptical scenarios, especially from elements of its own movement, of its own notions. For example, you know what? But before that, I just want to say that the naturalism I'm addressing is the one outlined by Wolff. In terms of what naturalism is, that's debated by. That it's a very wide variety. There are plenty of worldviews within what's known as the natural world, so I'm going to be addressing Wolff directly. If there's another form or formulation of naturalism that someone else has, I'm not going to be addressing it, so you could rest assured it's not going to be a blanket attack. The first thing I want to address is something called Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, the notion that evolution and naturalism are incompatible with one another. At least some forms of naturalism. Under naturalism, as probably characterized by Wolff, the laws of nature are descriptions of the regularities found within nature. However, I would actually contest that. Would contest that that doesn't allow for the skeptical scenario. So, for example, let's take the fact that our brains evolved from past events wherein the person whose reproductive organs that were best equipped to carry their offsprings were the ones that survived. Now, it's all about the property of evolution is a being who captures their notion of intellect, intelligence from evolutionary processes didn't do that because evolution had that in mind, or that was a specific goal it had, or that's what comes about it. The main point of evolution is that those human beings who have the traits that are best equipped to pass on genes are what's carried out. So the belief, and we of course get our beliefs through the natural process. So, but if that's the case, how can we tell that our brains were not invented, the beliefs that our brains have were not carried over just for the fact of, let's say, believing in things that help us survive? Naturalism included. I mean, naturalism is, of course, a belief. It might be a rationally justified belief, but it's a belief nonetheless. So, Alvin Planting. So, but remember, one could take another position as a naturalist on this one. One could be a pragmatist and just accept that. Say, yeah, that's fine. That's a skeptical scenario, but it's about the beliefs that help us out, that are beneficial. But Wolff explicitly said in his position that truth is that which corresponds to reality. So he's taking a correspondence theory. So how do you... So, again, but the point of the matter is, even that would be under dispute of naturalism, because you don't know if it's corresponding to reality because of the fact that it corresponds to reality, or because of the fact that it's a belief you have that by thinking it corresponds to reality best helps you to survive. Now, so of course you have this skeptical scenario that just arises. How do you deal with that on naturalism? It's I would liken it to your problem of evil. Speaking of, second of all, I'm going to address some points, to address Wolf point by point from now on. Now, there's some other things. One has to ask, how do you know it was God? I detailed it in my first one. I said because it has to have full, it has to lack any notion of potency. It has to be pure act, or actus primus. It couldn't have any room to change at all. To go from a state of existence, of non-existence to existence, is a potency. So we're not talking about God, or the prime mover, as it were, that I'm levying out. And as for how do I know it was God, it's either going to be the prime mover or another mover, in which case it would require subsequent movers until you get to the prime mover again. There can't be an actual infinite of movers. So those objections kind of miss the mark on this one. The problem of evil. I would actually give what I call the PSR defense, or the defense from the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason states that that a thing's intelligibility there must be an explanation for something's intelligibility, or it must be rendered explicable by something. It doesn't necessarily state that it has to be one thing. It just states that it has to be explicable for something. So I would argue on the value of the PSR. And I would argue for the value of the PSR, I would state that that's where science is necessary. If we say, oh, that's just the way it is, we're not doing science. Because everything, even if it's within the universe, it has to be explained by a principle of sufficient reason. Especially if there's something given its nature that would require us to expect it. So God, now how do I get to a defense against the problem of evil? Well, first of all, we should ask ourselves what humans are. Imperfect beings. That's our nature. So it has to be explicable by something. Now, it's the fact that we do horrible things, or have imperfect actions. Imagine an imperfect being who does perfect actions all the time. That would be contrary to the principle of sufficient reason, something even God himself couldn't violate. So, if humans are imperfect creatures, they must have imperfect actions. Humans are imperfect by our nature. Even if we were angels or something high up until we get up before the point of reaching God, we're still imperfect. Therefore, we have to have imperfect actions that not even God could stop. Now, why couldn't God just... Now, of course, someone could come up with the objection, why could not God just state that, okay, how about he consoles us into doing something good? Well, there's, again, a problem. We have... if God wills something, it will necessarily happen. If God knows something, too, it will necessarily happen. So, in order for us to have free will, God could not necessarily push for us to act contrary to our own nature. So what we do is we know that God has two wills. A sovereign will, the one that necessarily gives an outcome, and a permissive will, one that permits something. So God has to permit evil and our free actions to come out therein. So, of course, evil's going to pop out, and God deals with it in the best way possible. At least as I would, or will deal with it in a better way possible. So, and not to mention that the existence of God, at least the prime mover I'm outlining, would not necessarily mean that evil doesn't exist. One could take a deistic position, where God creates but does not necessarily intervene. That's also possible, because I'm only trying to establish the existence of the supernatural, at least one supernatural entity. As for science being that which gives us all the practical benefits, there's a bit of a problem there. Just because science is known to work does not necessarily mean or guarantee that science is the only way of knowing things. It would be like saying, yeah, we have metal detectors, but doesn't necessarily say that other methods don't work for finding metal, like taking a shovel and randomly digging at the beach. That could work too. Not as effective, but it still is a method that could provide results. And again, deducing things in an axiomatic way from one axiom to another, especially if the first axiom is something observable, such as change, if we are doing that, then it's not exactly as baseless or arbitrary as just digging at the beach. It has to conform to reason, It has to conform to reason and coherence. And let's see. From there, I think I might forfeit the rest of my time if I don't see anything. Oh, and the laws of nature. That's actually pretty interesting because the laws of nature come from a Newtonian sense of God's ordinance of how the universe ought to operate. It wasn't a descriptive thing until Hume came. But now I actually believe that laws are actually prescriptive in the sense that these are what the natures of these things tend to do in the universal sense, so the particular does it as well. So let's say, so things that are rubbery are rubbery have the end of bouncing. It's part of their nature. So when you ever see a ball bounce off the ground, it's not because balls in the past have done it, which is a problem of induction. It's because that's what specific nature directs. Now, if you disagree with me, so for example, we had the question of why does ice freeze water instead of do something else with it, like make Coca-Cola or boil it? I mean, that's not logically inconsistent. That's what the nature is directing. On naturalism, that could be the case just afterwards. At least the naturalism that I would think Wolff is prescribing here. So as to not carry out things, I'll end my time here. Sorry, those objections were short, but there's a lot of them.
Okay. All right. So that was Epi with his 10-minute rebuttal. And now I'm going to reset the clock here. And Wolff, whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. And starting now.
All right. Just to respond to the first point. All right. The Plantinga's argument, evolution, argument against naturalism. Apparently, it's not rational to be a naturalist and need evolutionary theory because it. The criticism seems to be based on a misunderstanding of what evolution by natural selection actually entails for actual beliefs. I mean, evolution by natural selection clearly tends to improve cognitive faculties over time, not the other way around. There's no scientific evidence that warrants that actually says bad faculties entail bad beliefs. And even if this was the case, we have learned behavior that can correct such errors. And with humans, given our adaptive abilities with behavioral tools, we could be able to refine the methods we use to understand the world we inhabit. So I really feel like that's a bit of a point there. Second, you also mentioned the prime mover argument. Taking the analogy to the extreme, potentially everything in the universe could have come from little pantheistic movers, trillions of them, where each of them would consist of the simplest possible entity needing only one iota of knowledge of one or two things to react or not to react. Each of them here could have consisted of a single subatomic particle. Thus, we could have an entire universe built from these many unintelligent movers. This would also explain their silence and agrees perfectly with the science of physics. Now, you could actually take that, apply the same syllogism, and say that that's a good case for it. But if there's not any actual observation or testing with regard to how I'm actually coming up with this, I don't really see how it actually how it would actually follow. So I think with that point, it would actually still there would still have to be some questions with regard to how this deity would function, how the integration process would go. Basically, just further investigation is required to even make a case for it. Also, the problem of evil was brought up. Yeah, one response, just to anticipate from that, is it seems to be inconsistent. The doublespeak wouldn't work when, like, an entity like a god would say, "Do as I say, not as I do," and it cannot legitimately anyone, neither an entity like God or his representatives, could say that it's legitimate that this God is all omnibenevolent and omnipotent, and he lets his most of the people that believe in him suffer in a world in which he could actually stop evil. I mean, God, being the ultimate example of moral virtue, does nothing to alleviate or prevent pointless suffering in the world, despite having this power. So, as with many cases we've seen, believing in God actually creates more of an impediment with regard to actually improving life, because he's governing everything, and apparently not doing anything to actually cease the suffering that is going on in the world that he created. Now, you also mentioned science, as if I was trying to endorse scientism. Now, the main thing I brought up at the beginning was that science is the best tool ever devised with understanding how the world works. The best. Now, yes, there are other methods of actually understanding reality, like reason, like empiricism, but in terms of its predictive power, in terms of understanding the universe, it just speaks volumes. I mean, the fact that we're speaking through the internet is self-evident of this. And actually, I find it interesting that with every scientific advancement that has been made, God moves further into the areas in which humans haven't yet figured out yet. You know, almost as if it's sort of a God of the gaps warrior hypothesis in such a way. Not that I'm saying that you're stating this, but that's just usually a trend that I happen to see. But yes, I still think that naturalism has the default position, and supernaturalism has to still be refined. But that's my response to everything that's just been said.
Okay, is that the end of your rebuttal?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right, so I'll reset the clock here. And now for my personal favorite part of the debate, the cross-examination. So 5 minutes for each. We're going to start off with Epi. I believe, yeah, so you're the one who's going to be asking the questions, and Wolf, you're going to be responding, and then vice versa after 5 minutes for another 5 minutes. All right, so Epi, whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
I'm ready.
And starting the clock now.
Okay, well, for my first question, yes or no? Did you just start finding me attractive?
I start calling you attractive.
Did you start finding me attractive?
Well, I
Have you actually? I should rephrase that. Have you always found me attractive? Yes or no? By the way.
Well, I wouldn't. I mean, I think attractive might be the wrong word. I guess like charming in a way. Fine, sure.
Okay. This was supposed to be a joke loaded question. So that was.
Yeah. I know. I was just playing along.
Oh yeah. By the way, rules of debate. I'm gonna pause the clock here. Oops. I guess I didn't pause it. But anyway.
I just spent 44 minutes on a joke. So.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway. If you guys want to hook up with each other, do that after debate. Nah, just kidding. Just kidding.
Oh, man.
I'm glad we can have fun with this.
All right.
Taking pot shots out as a moderator.
All right. Okay, I'm starting the clock now. We're for real. Bye. There we go.
Okay. First question. I'm just going to stick to your take on the prime mover argument because that's the one I've been pushing. Like I said, the problem of evil really is inconsequential because we could always posit the prime mover is deistic in nature. That the nature of the prime mover does not necessarily entail worship. But so you kind of phrased a parody argument where we have a lot of these pantheistic prime movers. But the property that I held makes God unique is the fact that he is actus purus or pure act, and in him there is no potency. Also, this notion that a PSR exists, and you said, of course, these pantheistic movers have no knowledge. So here's the first thing to ask: what property distinguishes these pantheistic movers from one another?
Well, they have. Well, I never really said that they didn't have knowledge. They had they had bits of knowledge of one or two things to react or not to react. And basically they would consist of subatomic particles which could be capable of producing a universe or self-organizing a universe.
All right. Do they have a Do they have a distinguishing property between them? And if so, what is it?
To react or not react.
To react or not. So, but I take it you think that there's more than two, right?
I mean, essentially trillions. Okay, it's sort of like another sense of emergence in which they have simple rules they follow, and through that they produce infinitely complex systems like this universe that we're currently in.
So they have. You're saying they have a potency to react or not react?
Yes.
Okay, but if they have potency, then what moves them?
Well, I mean, they tend to self-replicate themselves to propel themselves, and that's how they produce complex structures.
Does this go on forever? So this is eternal, correct?
Quite possibly, it's unknown.
It's infinite.
Yeah, let's go with that, infinite.
Alright, it's infinite. It never stops or starts. But if that was the case, we would have an actual infinite, right?
Quite possibly.
And, well, it would entail either we do or we don't.
Okay, let's say for argument's sake, yeah, it does.
Okay, but that just leads us back to Zeno's paradoxes. In order for them to start moving at one moment, they would have had to start moving and fall at another moment. But before that, it would have to have been another moment and another moment. So there is really no point in which they start. There is really no point in time when they actually start moving. So how could they even move in the first place? It would be kind of like if you asked me where was a book and I said, oh.
Well, I think they would just. I believe they would just be. I believe.
They would be what?
They would just be. They would just be.
That would mean that they were all pure acts. In which case, they couldn't start going on or off as you were.
Well, I mean, if they're not to cut you off, but I mean, if they're pantheistic, obviously, then they're different than something of a personal entity, producing these things. I mean, they would be manifested throughout all of reality in that sense.
Yeah, but that would hardly make them prime movers. That would just make them movers, one among many. Which in case was not Which in case is what I was using the prime mover to explain. I would have no problem with these mini movers. Actually, it would be perfectly fine by me. In fact, I could just say that they're angels and say, yeah, that's what explains the angels. But jokingly, of course. But I don't see how this would make a good parody of the prime mover.
Well, I mean, for one, if these things have the power to, well, not necessarily the power, but the knowledge of how to put these little bit itty things together, given time and variation, they could produce symmetrical things that have a sense of complexity, just to produce an emergent universe like the one we're seeing, basically from essential chaos, through cosmic evolution, biological evolution. I'm pretty sure that those principles could actually apply there.
Yeah, they could apply, but they would need subsequent principles until you culminate to a prime mover, of course. That's what's at debate here. Okay, and that's up. All right, I believe it's your turn, Wolf.
Yeah, I guess I got blown up on my Spinoza. Anyway.
Aristotle over Spinoza any day. Sorry.
All right. So whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Okay.
Okay, starting now.
Okay, so you brought. I remember you bringing up. You brought up science in that sense. And you talked about like it being like. How would you? Okay, basically. Okay, just give me a second.
Would you mind?
Okay, I got it. How would you? How do you? how do you reconcile miracles being physically impossible according to scientific laws?
Oh, all right. Here's how I would say it. Miracles arise out of the suspension of, and of course, Aaron Rawls deals with a similar argument. So, what I would just essentially say is that that's when the regularities in nature stop for a greater ends or means or purpose. So that would just be it.
I'm sorry, I missed that last sentence. Could you repeat that?
All right. So they would exist because particular things have ends within their nature. So, for example, it is within the ends of it's in the ends of a rubber ball to bounce. That's its final cause or purposeness. That's what it's directed to. That's why it bounces it on a regular basis. However, God suspends the act of its nature, and substitutes something of his own ends and means for it to act, and that's how we essentially get a miracle.
How would you be able to determine that anomaly on a pragmatic level?
On a pragmatic level? Oh, are you talking like Hume's argument against miracles?
Well, honestly, just in general.
All right. In general, I would say that miracles are based on revelatory evidence as opposed to something that you could deduce in nature.
Yeah.
I didn't say miracles, for example, can be deduced and say, here's evidence for miracles in nature. But what I would say is that there is at least one supernatural entity we could be aware does exist, and we can do that by deducing things in nature, whether or not miracles exist or happen.
Okay, if something, how do you reconcile the conundrum that if something were worse that was said to be supernatural within the universe, it could just be something natural that could be explained through science? How would that not be a conundrum for your worldview, and that you're in that constant paradox, or what?
As a Christian or a theist in general?
In general.
No, because theism or deism, however you parse it out, is not relying upon God performing miracles in the natural world. In fact, Aristotle, who was a theist, did not hold that miracles could happen.
Okay, how about as a Christian then?
As a Christian, I would say that that's revealed to us through the Holy Spirit, as a private, personal revelation.
So that would be a sense of personal experience for you, not of something of an empirical nature.
No, not at all.
No to the empirical, or
yeah. I'm saying you're right. It would be it's not something that could be known empirically, or through deduction.
Okay. So basically, what in your view, like basically just just on a personal level for you, like be it intuition or deductive like reasoning, how would you best discern like what the supernatural would have for you in terms of your life, like how it would affect you and stuff?
Oh, on a personal basis, well, as a general Christian, I would just say that for me, God is the end of my happiness. I would use some kind of argument from desire, if you will, for everybody, but even for me, I think that there's nothing in this world that fulfills my happiness or desires. Yet ultimately, since my desires lead to something on the usual scale, they must in this sense too. So it's more of an intuitive thing.
Okay, guys, that's the 5 minutes. Man, this is the part that I hate because the Q&A, man, it gets really good. Both sides are asking really interesting questions, and I have such a limited time to respond. Oh, man. So I understand how frustrating it could be. during this part of the debate. But anyway, so I guess with that, without further ado, we're up to the final part of the debate, the 5-minute conclusion. So 5 minutes for each side. We're going to start off with Epi, and then we'll end it with Wolf. All right, so actually let me do a little switcheroo here. Have a little fun here with my app here. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see that, but I got a little. I love this this time bomb stopwatch here. So, all right. So whenever you guys are ready, I'm gonna start the clock.
All right. I am ready.
Okay, starting now.
I'm actually going to devote this time to kind of elaborating on what I was saying in the question and answer. And this is because I think I felt like a gibbering idiot during that time, especially with the miracles thing. So here's how I'll address it. We believe in the existence of final causes. What are final causes, you ask? Where final causes or teleology is concerned, several crucial distinctions need to be kept in mind so that common misunderstandings are avoided. First, we distinguish intrinsic and extrinsic finality, that the parts of a watch are directed toward the end of telling time has nothing to do with the nature of the parts themselves. The time-telling function is imposed on the parts entirely from the outside by the watchmaker and the users of the watch. The finality is here thus extrinsic. By contrast, the tendency of an acorn to grow into an oak is intrinsic to the sense that it is just the nature of an acorn to grow into an oak, whereas the metal bits of the watch are still going to be metal bits whether or not they are played as a role of a timepiece. An acorn would not be an acorn if it did not have a tendency to develop into an oak. This distinction is very closely connected to the Aristotelian distinction between artifacts and true substances. As the indicate, so just from that little paragraph by, again, Edward Fraser Scholastic Metaphysics, final causes are express the intrinsic purposes of a thing to go from state A to B. Now, of course, what God does here is, in the case of an acorn, if we were to see an acorn pile into the ground and bring about cotton candy, a tree with cotton candy instead of leaves, that would be pretty awesome. In fact, I think we'd all say, yeah, that's pretty much a miracle, at least for me, because the purpose, the tendency of the acorn to grow from being an acorn into a candy tree, as opposed to what it usually is due to its nature, an oak tree, that is what tends to be a miracle. It doesn't violate now, of course, it doesn't violate the laws of nature because God supervenes over both of them, or God guides them. So that's essentially what I mean by miracle, and that's how God accomplishes this. Nature or the rules of the universe are not merely descriptive of how things behave. Rather, they are prescriptive, that they are prescribed by antecedent things and what their nature directs them towards. If you imagine this, for example, ask yourself the question, why does an acorn go into an oak tree as opposed to a cotton candy tree? Well, you could say these other mechanisms in nature, but you need a way to explain those mechanisms and those mechanisms. And of course, we can't get into an actual infinite because, as I expressed earlier, so of course we dictate that there's a final cause towards them, or an end, if you will, an end purpose in their existence. Onto some other things. I think the argument for motion stood fairly well. I think I handled the parity objection pretty easily, and because I think that establishes the existence of at least a prime mover. Remember, guys, a prime mover does not require existence or love or affection or praise and worship. You can't deduce that from the effects of creation. And that requires revelation. But it does tell us that at least one supernatural entity who we don't perceive directly, who is at work in the universe, sustaining the very motion of the universe itself, exists. And I think that's grounds to believe that it is reasonable to believe in the supernatural because at least one supernatural thing exists. And with that, I end my conclusion.
Okay, let me. Okay, looks like it's already reset and ready to go. And Wolf, on with your 5-minute closing, whenever you're ready.
All right. Yeah, think I'm ready.
Okay, starting now.
Okay. Usually when people talk about miracles, they talk about, of course, things that can't be explained by scientific laws, and usually they also bring up things that we could perceive in nature that they say is a miracle, like the miracle of the human body or the eye and stuff like that. And usually this is an analogy for what they perceive as, incredibly complex. But when you understand like how the eye, for example, is developed like for depth perception, which is a good trait to have when you're part of a bipedal social species that basically maintains hand-eye coordination and also tends to try and not break its neck. When we basically understand the naturalistic explanations behind how these things like develop and grow in complexity, via physical laws, the whole need for a claimed supernatural influence becomes almost superfluous. And also just to bring up that the thing about the natural laws being prescriptive. I remember Epi bringing up Isaac Newton, who not only was a physicist but a Christian theologian. Let's look at that right now. Yes, he was a theologian. He was also an alchemist. And by the way, not I know this is gonna sound weird, but I didn't think you were a gibbering idiot, Epi. At least you didn't pull a full G-man. Anyway, yeah, Newton was a Christian theologian and alchemist, but none of that was actually necessary to actually understand, his research with regard to gravity, laws of motion, acceleration, velocity, and stuff, action, reaction. Understand how these principles, utilizing them through a scientific method, producing bridges that could stay up, pistons that actually react in engines and help cars move, satellites that actually can maintain in the planet's orbit. These consist of understanding it based on like the materialistic and the naturalistic. So that actually is just based on understanding that through physical evidence and reason and logic, not through any supernatural influence. I doubt people today actually cares about his Christianity, to be honest with you, in terms of what his scientific research actually produced and actually influenced, which goes on to Einstein and Sagan and Stephen Hawking, which this is just what science is. Science is a collaborative human enterprise expanding through generations. We remember those who prepared the way, and we see for them also. So and also bringing up also the prime moving argument, just to go through that one more time. Yes, you can. You could have cases where you could essentially remove the whole personal entity type of thing and argue for like a deistic case, but at the same time you'd still ultimately be forced to question this entity with regard to its origins, and also just figuring out like, I remember this whole thing about the specified sequential information argument going around, and how this essentially would impact science with regard to how we understand complex life to actually arise. Ultimately, even if we grant, like beyond the evolution of life and its emergence, I mean, we'd ultimately have to ask where would this thing's complexity arise, because to actually, to actually say that this thing was always here without a cause, it would just be a violation of Occam's razor. And with that, I sacrifice the time and finish with this closing. I think naturalism is still the default position. It has not yet been moved. If substantial evidence were actually granted, I would change my position. Otherwise, I remain within the null hypothesis. And with that, I close my statement.
Okay. Well, folks, that's the end of the debate. And it was a pleasure being a moderator here. It was my first time moderating any debate. And yeah, I don't know what else to do next.
Well, I did say we could save this part of the hangout just for like three-way gap. You know, um,
Ah, okay.
whether or not you guys wanted to change the debate is something else. Um, my thoughts are I really enjoyed it. It's actually nice going to the deep scholastic roots of my arguments.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of heady
Also,
stuff.
yeah. Also, I liked how you brought up Richard Carrier. He's a thinker in the atheist circles that it gets a bit overlooked.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of quoting Epicurus, like the actual philosopher Epicurus in like Realm of Evil, but I just forgot.
He's yeah, Epicurus. Well, he was actually a theist too.
Yeah, but yet, I mean, I just thought that that was ironic that you actually when it gets there, the name is your YouTube name's Epicurus.
Hmm.
Here's the reason why I always liked Epicurus. It's his ethics. He was a negative hedonist. He believed that the good was not the seeking of pleasure like hedonists usually tend to. They think that, oh, life is eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow you'll die. Get a lot of pleasure out of life before everything goes out. He was a hedonist in the negative sense. He thought that life was just minimalizing pain and just seeking contentness. And I thought, wow, that's actually pretty interesting. It's an acknowledgement of that you're not going to find fulfillment within the world itself, but rather, but so he looked inward. And of course, as a Christian, that showed me something that, wow, if you can't find anything outwardly that brings you happiness, there's something that has to appeal to us in an inward sense. And of course, even though Epicurus didn't look to the gods for advice, but sought contentness in himself, um, I also don't agree with that, but I think it is a wiser answer. And of course, I search for God to bring up the fulfillment of my own being. And in that, I actually find pleasure. I think even John Piper, who's a Calvinist thinker and theologian, has a view on this called Christian hedonism, where he thinks that for people who are Christians, seeking pleasure in God is what gives Christians fulfillment in all their actions. And I always thought, oh, that's a pretty interesting way to look at it.
Well, I enjoyed the debate, and definitely plan on. As a matter of fact, I wanted to get the watch link too, so I can actually watch the debate again. And and this time I'll be able to really, really sit down and focus on what was said on both sides. So,
No worries.
uh,
I saw you caught a bit of the G-Man hangout. What was
yeah,
it? G-Man, was it the joke podcast I was
it's
before?
called Motives of Atheists. Yeah.
Oh, I was really hoping he would start his own. I jokingly said this. I was hoping he'd start his own because earlier, if you guys don't follow G-Man's antics, he was in a hangout with a few Calvinists and some atheists who are overlooking. And the atheists, of course, were like, yeah, two theists arguing. Of course, anyone who was really involved in the conversation knew it was a very deep theological issue. Uh, G-Man was arguing the typical free will stuff. Jesus dies for everyone. And the Calvinists were, no, that's not really biblical. Of course, G-Man was not really proving his case. And, of course, he got booted for um, his antics. And
Yes.
I jokingly said afterwards, he should name his next hangout G-Man Against God's Eternal Decree, um, because he usually has a hangout that's called G-Man Against the World.
Right, right. And it's
I,
usually. Go ahead.
yeah, honestly, I gotta be honest with you. It's refreshing to debate someone on that's on a different level than Dream, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I said in the hangout, the G-Man is concerned about the world, non-believers laughing at us when we argue with each other. And to me, I say that's actually could serve as a good thing, because when you have people to act the way he did in his hangout, he's yelling and cutting people off, and I mean, that should when you hear people laughing at you because of your behavior, that should act as a tool for humility And if you don't learn any humility after that, then I don't really know what else to tell you. So.
Yeah, and of course the world is going to, if you're a Calvinist, the world's going to laugh at you anyway. I mean, no matter what your actions are.
That's right.
Not to mention the fact that if you're the one who's continuing in the argument, you're not hindering that. If you think that's the reason why Christians are going to argue because we disagree with one another, it happens. We could either choose to argue in a nice fashion or not in a nice fashion.
Well, it's no different than anybody else from any other group. I mean, we're just
exactly. I mean,
people want the truth.
I mean, atheists and within the atheist community, there's the whole atheist plus movement versus the non-atheist plus movement.
Yeah, it's people want the truth, and they have their positions on, what they're seeing. So, but anyway, again, I want to thank you again for making me the moderator. I'm actually going to head out, get me some grub, and try to check out this TV show that's online now.
Yeah, no worries. I think there's a hangout I want to get to as well. Hey, Wolf, I'll give you the link.
All right, cool.
Yeah. All right, take care, guys.
You too, Beth.
All right.
Here it is, Wolf, and with that, I'll stop.